Hi guys, welcome to the channel of love. Okay, this is our study group time. We're going to read the chapter on synchronicities. It's chapter number 6. Now is the time to see what Dr. Wayne W. Dyer, see what he has to say about it all. You'll see it when you believe it. Okay, there is a fly flying around the room. It just landed on my cheek and made me giggle. Okay. So we've done the detachment. When I earlier on found this page, I've tried to record this already, okay, and I was just like so tired and sleepy. It was like, I've got to re-record, okay. I'd only done about 2 minutes, but I'd already put the book down, and when I lifted it up, it looked like it doesn't look like it is. The page looks like it's been creased and bent. Right. Anyway, we're on to page number. I've got to tell you about the page numbers, have I? Okay. 164 was the last page number detachment. I explained this in the last video. We're going to go better this time, apparently. We're not going to be so dozy. The fly came, landed on my cheek. We went again. Synchronicity. Okay. It doesn't give us a page number, so we know it's going to be 165, but it's got a 6 there. Synchronicity. The universe is complete and perfect. There can be no mistakes. Nothing is random. The entire one song is exquisitely synchronized. I want to itch my head. I'm scratching my head like this. This page here doesn't have a page number. We do go to page number 167. But what it takes me to is it feels like the book's upside down. So let's do the chapter on synchronicity. To understand synchronicity and to implement it, we are required to suspend some of our old ideas, to give up the notion of coincidence, of mistakes, our belief that people are imperfect. The principle that every single event and every single person is connected seems almost too much to accept. Most of us would rather hang on to the principle of randomness and error. We seldom consider that everything within our perfectly operating universe may also be operating perfectly. It appears easier to believe that unexplainable coincidences occur for no reason. The term synchronicity was first used by Carl Jung. He spent his life attempting to unravel the mysterious threads that seem to wind together in a pattern that is impossible for us, in form, to decipher. He described synchronicity as the simultaneous occurrence of two meaningfully but not casually connected events. He hypothesized that a collaboration exists between people and events that seem somehow to involve fate and is always operating in the universe. The basics of belief in synchronicity are that every single life has a purpose and a deeper meaning that we are genuinely aware of. Generally aware of. Behind all form is an intelligence that is exquisitely perfect and that works in a synchronized fashion. Everything happens for a purpose, and the puzzle pieces of life fit together perfectly. When you trust and know these thoughts, you will daily recognize evidence for your belief in synchronicity. I am convinced that this phenomenon is omnipresent in my life and that there are no accidents of any kind. Carl Jung went on to say, at the very moment when we are struggling to sustain a sense of personal autonomy, we are almost caught up in vital forces that are much larger than ourselves, so that while we may be the protagonists of our lives, we are the extras of spear carriers in some larger drama. Or, as we have explored, there is only one dream, God's dream, and we are all characters in it, similar to the characters that we create for our individual dreams. Okay, so synchronicity in all of our lives. For the past several years, I have asked my lecture audiences, how many of you have had experience of thinking about someone and then receiving a letter or a phone call from that person the same day he or she appears in your thoughts? And have any of you run into someone you have not thought of in years just after his or her name happened to come up in conversation? Every hand in the audience usually goes up. Synchronicity, or the connection between seemingly random events and thoughts, seems to be a universal human experience. It happens to all of us quite regularly, and it tends to repeat itself in a series of appealingly unexplainable happenings. The fact is that the more we loosen up and allow ourselves to flow in the energy system of the universe, the more we experience this phenomenon. Ultimately, we cease being surprised by these happenstances and recognise them as part of the mysterious perfection of our existence. I would bet that you have had the experience of absolutely knowing who was calling on the phone before you answered it. I am sure that you have had what has been labelled a Deja Vu Experience, wherein you knew that you had been in that very moment and lived that exact situation previously. I would also wager that you have found yourself doing something that you had never done before and were unable to explain why you were doing it until later, when you could look back and clearly see the reason. Let me give you an example of one such situation in my life. Some years ago, my publisher offered me a sizable advance for a non-fiction book that would be a follow-up to Your Erroneous Zones and Pulling Your Own Strings. I thought about the possible content of my new book for months, and frankly, I was stuck as to what avenue to pursue. One day, I was sitting by the ocean thinking about what to write when I felt a strong urge to get up, get dressed, and get into my car. It was totally uncharacteristic of me to want to leave the tranquility of the beach at that time of the day to get in my car and drive unnecessarily. Yet I drove without thinking about where I was headed, and after 30 minutes or so I found myself parking at the Pompano Fashion Mall. I was baffled by my behaviour. I generally avoided shopping malls and would never consider spending a beautiful sunny afternoon at one. I walked directly to the bookstore and immediately went to the section on psychology. One book was sticking out from the others, about to fall from the crowded shelf. I pulled that book out, glanced through it, and went to the checkout counter and purchased it. I drove home, walked back to my beach spot, and read the book from cover to cover. And I knew precisely what I had to write about. I outlined the book, which later became The Sky's the Limit, in a matter of a few hours. My subject was self-actualization, or what I call no-limit living. I felt a clear sense of being able to make this area of human psychology more understandable and available to the average person. I knew that what I must write about was how to become a person who lives life at the very highest levels, and how to cultivate a sense of purpose and meaning. It was clear to me after that strange experience of being propelled to read a new book. The book that practically fell into my hands was Abraham H. Maslow's The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. His earlier writings have been a powerful influence on me, but this book was the impetus for my writing The Sky's the Limit. When I was stuck, a seemingly coincidental force guided me exactly where I needed to go, and so I dedicated The Sky's the Limit to Dr. Maslow. I feel a special kind of mission to carry on his work and make his ideas on mankind's potential greatness available to more people. I am sure you can recall similar kinds of eerie happenings in your life, where you did something totally out of character and suddenly saw very clearly why. How can we even begin to explain such things? How did the card get inside the seatbelt buckle that led me to my father's grave? How can a thought suddenly connect you to someone or something that seems so unconnected? The word connectedness is vital to understanding the principle of synchronicity. Let me have a drink and we just repeat. We'll start again from this line. The word connectedness is vital to understanding the principle of synchronicity. In some mysterious, undefinable way, everything seems to be connected, even though we cannot see the connections. In some strange way, the right person or the right series of events crops up just in time to help us over the threshold of some troubling problem. Once we understand that everything is connected in some way, even though we cannot see the connectors, this universal principle of synchronicity becomes more believable and ultimately more available to us. There is a rhythm to the universe. When we are able to get quiet enough, we experience how we are a part of that perfect rhythm. I keep coming back to the concept of perfection, because for many, there is such a strong belief in imperfection. I believe our world cannot be anything other than perfect. The precise amount of energy required to heat and sustain our planet comes from the sun, without burning up its own energy source. The Earth rotates perfectly on its axis without being in danger of falling off. The entire universe has an intelligent supporting it, which I call God, and you can call anything that you like. The salmon swimming upstream, back to their spawning site, is mysteriously perfect. The swallows show up on the same day, century after century. The spider knows how to build his web without going to web school. The instincts for making the entire one song work perfectly are built in by an intelligence which permeates all form, and we know very little about how any of it works. Yet it is all connected in some way, from generation to generation, throughout all species and into infinity. If we can begin to grasp this process of connectedness, even in a tiny way, we will also begin to understand, ever so slightly, the principle of synchronicity, to start to believe in this phenomenal intelligence that supports all life so perfectly. In order to see that there are connectors in the universe that we cannot always see with our eyes and hold in our hands, let me take you on a brief excursion of connectedness. The easiest connectors to believe in. Obviously, the easiest things for us to believe in are those that we can see, hence the notion, I'll believe it when I see it, permeates our linear, form-only culture. If you could see a child pulling a toy with a long string, you have very little difficulty in seeing and believing in the connection between that moving toy and the child's actions. There is the string, I see the connection. When something is connected, and we can see, hear, taste, touch or smell that connection, we have no difficulty in believing in its connectedness. Thus, when we put gasoline in the car and start the engine and begin to burn the fuel, we see the connectedness between our actions and our ability to move about via an automobile. We are not in a state of confusion or disbelief about how automobiles move from one point to another. So the easiest connectors that make things hang together are those that you see with your own eyes. Those that allow you to say to yourself, I see how that works and I believe it. More difficult connections form to hidden form. It's interesting, it called them the easiest connectors to believe in. And it says more difficult connections, form to hidden form. When you turn on the light from a wall switch, you cannot see the connection between that switch and the room suddenly alive with light. But you know that a connection exists. Know the connectors are hidden inside the walls. We do not have to see the connectors, we simply have to believe that they are present, even though they are hidden. And we then have a knowing about how this process works. This category of hidden connectors is a bit more difficult to comprehend, but not terribly so, since we place tremendous faith in the fact that the connectors are still in form. Even though they are out of view, we can find them if we really want to. Even more difficult connections form to invisible form. You are sitting in your living room watching a television program. Rather than getting up to change the channel, you take in your hand the remote control, which is in no way connected to the television set. You press one of its buttons and the channel changes. The television set is responding to some sort of invisible signal. How does this work? You cannot see any connectors. You cannot smell or hear anything. You can even place a piece of paper in front of the remote control and the connection still exists. What is going on here? This category of connectors is something that all of us have grown accustomed to. We buy our children toy automobiles which run by remote control. A left turn for the toy car 20 feet away is accomplished by pressing a left turn button. Something travels through the air and instructs the car to turn left. No wires, no strings, no visible connections. And yet we believe in these connectors, even though most of us know almost nothing about how they work. We believe that invisible signals fly through the air because that is what we are told, yet we have never seen those signals. So now we are becoming more aware that a connection between any two objects does not require form, as we perceive it with our senses to be present. We believe in and live with connections that defy our senses. We believe in them and they work. After a few years of living with these kinds of connectors, we even begin to take them for granted, despite the fact that they are a complete mystery to us. Invisible connections, human form to human form. The next time someone is talking to you across a room and you are listening, stop and ask yourself, how is this happening? That person is 10 feet away, moving his mouth. There is nothing but air between us, and yet I instantaneously hear and process everything that he is saying. How can this be? When you stop to consider this everyday, ordinary occurrence, it becomes mind-bending. Invisible things called sound waves travel between a mouth and an ear, and you are able to process it all with your brain. Where are the connectors? I see his mouth moving. Is he sending them out of his mouth? I do not try to make my ears pick up these invisible signals, yet they appear to do just that. We unquestionably believe in a whole classification of connections between people that our rational mind simply cannot fathom. We know that these invisible waves connect us from one person to another, or even from an object such as a radio or a door slamming to a person. We do not bother to make an attempt to figure it all out. We simply accept a principle called sound as something that exists, something that is part and parcel of our humanity. We never say it simply cannot be. If I cannot see it and touch it, then it must not exist. Our belief is this principle allows us to function as human beings. There are invisible connections. There are invisible connectors between people, and you participate in them every day. It's like food for thought, isn't it? Our own connections, our thought to our form. You are dancing with your partner, effortlessly gliding across the dance floor. Your feet are doing exactly what they are supposed to do. There is some kind of mysterious connection that exists between your thoughts and the neuromuscular activity of your feet. Why do your feet move perfectly in response to a thought which tells them to move? What is the connection? How can this be? Every single time you move the limbs and appendages of your form, they are responding to a thought. But a thought is invisible and formless, and that formlessness is somehow commanding those actions. You cannot see the connection. You cannot explain it. But nevertheless, the fact that you scratch your nose, or walk to the kitchen, or move your hand, or move towards a fly ball hit from a baseball bat, and put your gloved hand up to catch it, or make any other of the myriad movements that you engage in every day, gives evidence that invisible connectors exist which allow you to move about effortlessly in your everyday life. Mental energy directs muscular energy. Mental energy is thought. Therefore, thought is some kind of a connection between a desire and a physical outcome. You believe very strongly in this connection even though you cannot explain it. You accept this automatic stimulus response connection as a way of life. You believe in it. You function within it, and you never question whether a connection exists, for millions of daily movements give you absolute proof that there is a connection between the formless and the world of form. Keep this in mind as we move into the final areas where those connections exist. Okay. Perfectly synchronized, isn't it? I'm having a look at how long this chapter is. Ooh. I'm going to have to break it up, guys. How long have I been on for? Okay, I was really thinking about 30 minutes is long enough to read. Okay. Incomprehensible connections. Human thought to another human form. My wife is sitting in one part of the house, and our baby is in another part of the house, out of hearing range. My wife suddenly says to me, "The baby is crying. Will you go check on him?" Sure enough, he is crying, yet it was impossible for her to have heard the sound. Every mother who reads these words will nod her head in agreement, knowing that an invisible connection does exist between her thoughts and the actions of her baby. We have now gone beyond the comprehensible. There can be a connection between the thought of one person and the actions of another, without the benefit of any of the five senses. We all know that such an invisible connection can exist. My wife will be 10 miles away from the baby and say to me, "We have to go home now, the baby is ready to eat." I say, "How can you know that he is hungry? Do you just know his schedule that well?" She responds, "My milk just came in, and it always comes in when it's time for him to eat." What is this connection between her body and that of an infant 10 miles away? Her body knows precisely when to produce the milk based upon the thought of hunger in her infant, and it works perfectly every time. The connection is invisible, but it is definitely there for us to observe. If such an invisible connection can exist between a baby and mother, can it be tapped and utilised between any two humans? Can we refine this relationship between our thoughts and the world of someone else's form? While I was giving a speech recently in Sacramento, California, a father in the audience was holding his baby who started crying. The father became nervous and upset about disturbing the rest of the audience and started walking out, obviously still trying to hear my presentation. I suggested that he relax about his own discomfort and communicate that serenity to his infant. He smiled at me from the audience, relieved that I was not going to judge him for having his baby there, and he noticeably relaxed. The baby stopped fussing, and for the next 3 hours never made a peep. There was an invisible connection between his thoughts and the baby's behaviour, a connection which defies description. Your own connections, thought to thought. We do not even know what one thought is, and yet we all know and believe that a thought exists, and that a connection also exists between any one thought and another thought. For example, I sit here writing, thinking about what I'm going to write. That thought leads me to another thought that I should probably say it in this or that way. Then I have another thought that allows my finger to type out what those previously connected thoughts led me to. We can sit quietly and have any thought, since we are the source of thoughts. Then we can have another thought based upon that first thought, and perhaps even 10 more thoughts, until we then decide to put them into the world of form, or just to forget them. It is not the thought process that I am addressing. It is the existence of connections between thoughts. Connections most assuredly exist between two formless things called thoughts within you, the being that you are in this moment. If you can accept that these connections, these connectors exist, you are ready for the next level. If you are not ready, then I want to hear from you. Tell me, how can there not be connections between thoughts when one thought leads to another? Synchronicity. Human thought to other human thought. Hello, Mr. Fly. This is what I have been leading up to. Of course, the connectors are hidden, just as they have been in all of the categories except for the first one. Yet you believe in the existence of all of the other connections. So now try to open your heart and let in the fact that maybe, just maybe, this invisible connection also exists in our universe, and that once you start to believe in it, you will see it surfacing everywhere. Then evidence, while hidden to your senses, will show up and overwhelm you if you believe it. Let's see how they show up in your life and mine. Let me just itch my neck first. I feel like that fly has gone and landed there. Let's do this. Okay. The formless connections between human beings. Imagine a container the size of a grapefruit with a lid for the top. Now try to make an educated guess about how many pennies you could store in this container. You might come up with a guess in the neighbourhood of 300 pennies. If I were to ask you how many thoughts could you store in this container with the lid tightly sealed to avoid spillover, you would probably answer, how can you store thoughts in a container? Thoughts are formless and dimensionless. You cannot store something without physical specifications or boundaries in a container. Now ask yourself, what is a memory? Eventually, you have to conclude that memory is nothing more than thoughts. So where are those dimensionless thoughts stored in order for us to recall them as we do? Many people truly believe that memory is stored in the brain, yet the brain is a container about the size of a grapefruit. It is form. Can you store thoughts which are formless in a container which is form? Of course not. So what is memory? And where is it if it is not stored in the brain? Hang on, and we will speculate about this. Now let me ask you another question that I often hear. Where do we go when we die? Most people try to come up with some kind of place that fits into their form-only orientation. But I believe that most of what we are is outside the rules of form. And so my response to the question is another. Where do all of those characters that were there with you in your dream go when you awaken? So where do all of those characters that were there with you in your dream go when you awaken? Form has a place and can store it. Non-form thought does not require a place, since it is dimensionless. Thought is infinite, and so is impossible for us to comprehend from a position of form only. Experiencing our universal spirituality requires entering another dimension of being, where beginnings, endings, and storage places are unnecessary. Many religions speak of God creating heaven and earth in the beginning. When asked, when did God begin? They respond, God always was. That answer is acceptable to most of us, and we cease speculating on beginnings and endings. What is it that you think of when you think of this infiniteness that most people call God? That is the formless, no beginnings and no end, always existing dimension that I speak of throughout this book. It matters not what you call it. What matters is to let in the notion of the dimension in which you reside for the 2/3 of your life that you are awake. Thought, to me, is a part of that transcendent dimension. There are many labels for that formless dimension: spirituality, higher consciousness, inner wisdom, enlightenment, altered states of consciousness, and so on. I call it thought because we are all parts of it, and it is a part of all of us. Here in the universally recognised human activity of thought is a place to begin to comprehend the formless dimension. In some Eastern traditions, this higher dimension is called the Tao, which translates to the unfolding. It has been said that the Tao that is described is not the Tao. This is because form in words, whether spoken or written, describes the experience. What we experience with our senses is quite a different thing. The description differs from the experience in the dimension of thought, but in order to write about it, one uses words to make it as available as is possible. Otherwise, this book would be a series of blank pages. Now, if you were as enlightened as we might like to be, that would suffice. You would put the book down after careful study and say, "Profound indeed." But we are not there yet, at least I am not. So as a writer, I find myself writing about that which cannot be described. Here in this territory of synchronicity, the dimension of thought. If memory thoughts cannot be stored in our brain, then we have to be open to the possibility that they are outside the brain in some way. The mysterious happenings that seem so inexplicable may somehow come under the heading of thoughts meeting thoughts. If there are invisible connections between thoughts and form, then why not between thoughts and thoughts as well? And if thoughts do indeed meet with other thoughts, and we are the source of thoughts, then it seems possible that we create synchronistic situations. Consider thought as something that we create all the time. We are the source of this creative process through our connection to the divine and the infinite. With this awareness, we can dismiss coincidence and believe in the divine intelligence operating in our universe. Of course, once you believe it, you would truly see it working every day. Synchronicity is not a passive, speculative principle. It is here, it works, and you are part of it. Believe it or not, see it or not. Okay, I'm going to end here, guys. Page 178. What are these connectors made of? You can digest those last few pages before we move on to that. Okay, guys, I will catch up with you soon. Take care, much love. Bye for now.